evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and well, the streak is finally over by the narrowest of margins, and it's now been 9 days since we won a game of football. I'd almost forgotten that sick feeling you get when you leave the ground a loser, but we have a big opportunity to make amends on the big stage in a Friday night blockbuster against the Bulldogs and reclaim outright top spot. Joining us tonight, long-time Demonland George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, all Demonland listeners. Good evening, Bin Man. To quote a famous boxing phrase, we was wobbed. But unlike boxing, we don't get a rematch.
No, we were certainly robbed, and now that the umpires have admitted it, and we'll talk about it a bit later on, I propose that we go back there perhaps tomorrow night and play on from the boundary.
Sounds like a good plan.
Don't think that's going to happen. Also joining us tonight, Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man. How are you?
Good, thanks. Good evening, George. Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Demonlanders. And I'm not too bad. I'm a bit croaky, so I'll flag that ahead of time. But I was really a bit bemused at how upset people were about the loss and confused, actually. I mean, I thought we won because we had plus 11 clearances. In fact, I think we had plus 21 clearances and we won the inside 50 stat. So I am confused because I thought that meant that was the winning metric, but clearly not.
Well, you know that this whole clearances business does confuse me, and you're right. We did win all those, but we still didn't win the game, and that's always been my thing, that we've got to win this, otherwise we won't be able to win the game. And it turns out when we don't win, and we do win the game. So I don't know. I'm all confused, and we'll probably get into that a little bit later on. But I was at the Adelaide Oval for this game, and every D's fan that I spoke to prior to going that it had been there in the past had glowing reports about what a great stadium it is, from the new stands to the hill behind the goals to the mixture of the old facade blending into the new stands. And I must say that that's all true, and I was loving every minute of it. The weather was fantastic. The conditions were perfect. I had fantastic seats in the eastern stand, slap bang in the middle of the ground. I got there about an hour before the game, and the stadium, as expected at the time, was pretty empty, and I was enjoying the solitude. But that all changed when it was close to the start of the game. The fans started trickling in, and almost every seat around me filled up, and I was the only demon in a sea of feral Adelaide supporters. And now I thought I was pretty one-eyed in my support of the D's, but I do have the ability to recognise a blatant free kick, and I'm not talking about the couple late in the game that we'll no doubt get into in a minute. I'm talking about blatant head-high tackles, no ducking involved, no player slipping in a stray arm that might have gone a little too high, or a player's errant pinky that caught his opponent ever so slightly above the shoulders. I'm talking about rip your head off, blatant free kicks, and that was the source of some ferocious exclamations, from these feral crows. I could only take it for about 2 quarters, and then I bailed and went behind the goals to the Demons cheer squad because I just couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want to get into a fight. I'm there by myself. So yeah, it sort of soured the day just by the one-eyed supporters around me, but fair enough. They're there. They're in their hometown, and I don't know. Have you guys ever been to Adelaide Oval, George?
Yes, yeah. I was there a couple of years ago when we beat Adelaide. About 4 years ago now. I remember that game because Jaden Hunt was knocked out straight in front of us when he ran into the Adelaide ruckman. If you ever want to experience AFL football and how tough it is, go down to the boundary line, and that occurred to me when we were in Adelaide. But we won that game, so that was very good. And all I can say to you, Andy, is you just got to be grateful it wasn't the Port Adelaide crowd.
Well, I was planning. We got 16 points up, and I'll talk about it later because I thought we were then going to go roll it. So I was about to sort of go back up to where I was sitting and back to my seat just so I could sort of enjoy it, not to dig into them, but just so I could enjoy their frustration. Luckily, I didn't go back up there because I think that would have been even worse had I been sitting amongst those guys when the final siren went. B-Man, have you ever been to Adelaide Oval or any other interstate?
I've seen a test match there, but West Indies, Australia, but never a game of footy. And the stand wasn't up then. So I'm going to go to the Port Adelaide Melbourne game. So I've been wanting to see a game of footy there for a long time, but I think there's no way you could have gone back. Once you've left, Andy, you void every right then to come back. That sort of performance, you got to stick it out. Maybe that was the problem for the D's, but it was just a bit ferocious for us on the night.
Yeah, might have been. I don't know. Look, before we go into some individual efforts, let's talk about, I guess, the elephant in the room, those 2 free kicks not paid. Regular listeners to the show will know that this is a particular bugbear of mine, and despite what the free kick differential is on any given day, it's often the free kicks not given that hurt or potentially hurt you the most. And whilst those frees alone, they might not have led to us winning. We might not have kicked that goal from the side, but the other free kick, the non-dropping the ball, they can go 50-50 sometimes, and it doesn't mean they wouldn't have got a goal after that. I'll add, like I said before, when we were 16 points up with 8 minutes to go, I don't think we should have given up that lead. So, and we'll get into that a bit later on. But those 2 free kicks, not necessarily reasons we lost. There are a lot of other reasons. What did you guys make of those non-free kicks, George? I might start with you.
I don't think it was just those 2 non-free kicks. From a couple of perspectives, there were a couple of others which I think were just as bad. There was the free kick given against Spargo for a deliberate out of bounds when he kicked the ball forward.
But that bounced off his knee or off his shin. Yep. Like there was no intent whatsoever with that one.
Yeah, he's kicking the ball forward in the forward line. It's just ridiculous.
But it's not even kicking; it's come off him. There's no intent. There's got to be intent with that.
Yes, yeah. Look, we can talk about all the free kicks we like, but at the end of the day, we were 16 points up with 7 minutes to go, and we should never have allowed ourselves to be in that position that those kicks could have influenced the end result in the game. And even in that 7 minutes, there were some really silly decisions made by senior people in the leadership group about what you do in those tight situations. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. The sad part is we should never have been in that position in the first place. And in the end of the day, we got the consequences of what we didn't do during the game. We have to wear that and do something about it in future games.
Look, I find it equally frustrating. It drives me insane, Andy. And we talked about this in a podcast last year, and I was careful to make sure it was in a game that we'd won, because for me, I just think it's a complete furphy, the discussion about whether we deserved or we shouldn't have been in that position. That complete 2 separate issues. The fact is, deserved is a silly concept anyway. The fact is we lost the game by a point, and the fact is that we would have at least drawn it if that free kick, which was completely and utterly was there, should have been paid. There's absolutely zero doubt. The one Keys was definitely holding the ball too, but it's a little bit different because for 2 reasons, it was 90 seconds to go. It's in that last 30 seconds where the game is absolutely 100%. The result is changed. That's where it's really critical. And besides that, sort of holding the ball, they've been up and down, for 2 weeks in terms of whether the AFL has given them an interpretation or said not to pay it or whatever. So it was sort of consistently applied as it had been, but that error. So I think it's a complete furphy. It doesn't really matter. The point is whether we deserve it or didn't deserve it is neither here nor there. It should have been paid. If it had have been paid, we would have at least got a point from the resulting kick, and we would have had 2 points. And I just feel it drives me insane. It's over $1 billion industry. The next television rights are likely to be up around $700-800 billion, and that could well be the difference between us playing a home final against, say, Brisbane or playing at the Gabba. And ironically, Brisbane had exactly the same scenario in Geelong where that game was decided on not a decision, on a failure to make a decision, which is their job to do under pressure. And so you just can't have an industry or sport at the elite level. Errors are one thing, and there were a number of errors. The one that Lever was paid for in the back. I mean, they do that all day, every day in a game of footy. So there are a number of ones that went against us. But you can't have that sort of egregious error causing, changing the result of a match. Back in 2000, I think it was 9, wasn't it? When they changed the rules around the umpiring in the grand final when Hawkins hit the point, they brought in the ARC and all of the review system because they couldn't have a quote unquote a grand final being decided on an error. Well, why is this any different? It's just, you just cannot have the game at this elite level decided by an error of that magnitude. I think that I don't blame the umpire. I blame the AFL for not investing in their umpires. They should be professional. And the ones who can't make decisions under that sort of pressure, well, you don't become an elite umpire. You just don't, you say at the lower levels. It was a complete failure of umpiring. And as I say, I blame the AFL for not taking this seriously.
I mean, how do you teach that? How does them becoming professional make those mistakes go away?
Because how do police know when to respond in a violent situation? They train it over and over and over. That's what the Spargo said about one of the improvements they've made this year is responding under pressure. And as professional footballers, what Goodwin's done with them is put them in pressure situations and having to make them make decisions under pressure. So you find a mechanism to do that. You can bring psychologists in. You can bring, in NBA, they've got like the courts on top of them, and that's almost $1 trillion industry. They make the biggest calls under pressure, and the best ones don't flinch. They make the right call. There's incredibly few really controversial calls at NBA because they invest in it. And of course, you'll still get mistakes,
but less interpretation, I guess, in basketball when you compare it to.
But there was no interpretation on that. There was nothing to interpret. That was why the rule was brought in, because they even toughened it. So it was deliberate for a start. It would have been deliberate 10 years ago. They brought in the insufficient intent to ensure to raise the bar. So it not only was it deliberate, it was 100% not enough intent to keep it in. So it was clearly an error, and it's the same as the Bailey one. And there was a third one this year where a game was decided, I think Brisbane as well, didn't they? Was it against Collingwood?
Essendon Sydney was one.
So and you just cannot have a game at this elite level decided by such mistakes. And as I say, it doesn't matter what does deserve mean? I mean, what does that mean in the context? If you take that on board and say, well, Adelaide were the better team for the night, let's say that's the case. Imagine if they had lost the game because of that. Would have we deserved to win in that circumstance, or they deserved to have lost? It's neither here nor there. We should have got at least 2 points from that, and arguably a win. And it changes the rest of the season for us.
Sadly, the reality and the common factor with all those games is that in the last minute or two of each and every one of those games, the umpires have refused to pay anything inside the 50-metre arc in the last couple of minutes, which has affected the outcome of all of those three games. Because sadly, it's the easy solution. Don't make any decisions. But the AFL have bred a group of umpires who have benefited from actually not making decisions. You see it in other umpires who just keep calling play on during the whole game because they will not enforce the rules or will not actually make a decision. But I also believe that comes from professionalism.
Yeah, and you can train. I don't know whether this is urban myth or not, but I've been told by a couple of different people around the pathway into umpiring is the thing that they most focus on is your ability to run the 15, 16 kilometres a game that you have to, is fitness. Now, as I say, I'm not blaming the umpires. However, you're in the elite level of the sport. You need to have the courage to make that call because it's completely unfair for games to be decided on. As I say, there's already history for this. We changed the rules around the review. Now it's still that was 2009 when Hawkins hit the post. Arguably that was 3 or 4 minutes before the end of the game, maybe further. So it wasn't in the last 60 seconds. And they brought in all of the technology. Well, we could do that now. even with forgetting the professionalism, which they just have to do, you could say in the last minute that there's an overriding system from the video umpire, that in the last 60 seconds of play, if the ball has a stoppage, you could radio down and say, stop, we're going to review that. They've got the technology. They do it in soccer with the VAR. The systems are for the same reason, because you can't have, Premier League games decided on an umpiring error. So the technology exists. So the two things they should look at is professional, full-time professional umpires who have a 9 to 5 all week and then the weekends, and use technology where it's available.
We do have some audio backing that up with some people in the media, Jared Waitley and I believe it was David King on the radio, so we'll just play that.
And the worst bit is, do we have a paralysis in umpiring at the moment that it matters most, where the full consequence of the game weighs on you, and that paralyzes the umpire lifting the whistle and doing the job? So this is 3 times this season now. The final moment of a game may or may not have changed the result, but it was entitled to be in the player's hands. You were on first crack last night. A couple of people are talking about the deflection on the handball. Spare me that. Have a look at the broader piece of vision. Have a look where the umpire is, and then come back to me and say, oh, yeah, he saw that. The minute brush of Spargo's finger on the way past. Just go have a look where the umpire was. So it has nothing to do with that. This is paralysis. This is straight up insufficient intent, as the rule was changed to be, and as we, again, have been conditioned to accept it. The umpire must blow the whistle in that moment, just as he had to blow the whistle in the Zach Bailey holding the ball against Geelong. These are not even debatable points. Blow the whistle, do the job, let the players figure out how the game ends, not you.
In the umpire's code, they have to start at, are you prepared to blow the whistle and pay a free kick that changes the result of this game if you feel the decision is there? If they're not sure, find another job. Find another job. Because that has to be the starting point, that you're brave enough to wear the consequence of maybe getting it wrong, but probably getting it right. So if you absolutely see something, do you have the prunes to pay it? And they don't. At the moment, they don't. The whistle gets put away for the last 3 minutes of every game. And we talked about the Geelong and Brisbane game for ages. Why didn't he pay that? Everyone, the whole venue saw it. The Geelong fans went, oh, no. Oh, hang on, he hasn't paid it. Look, you've got to have the courage of your conviction. And if you haven't, and we all laugh at Razor Ray. We have a great time at Razor Ray's expense, but he would pay it.
He would pay it.
He actually is looking for it.
That's the moment where you need him on the job. You have to have the bottle to do it.
So they've got some problems in the AFL, haven't they? I mean, you look at the umpiring at the moment. You look at the MRO / AFL tribunal. You look at the soft cap, which is crueling, all facets of our competition at the moment, whether you see it or you don't see it just yet. We're seeing more and more evidence of things falling through the cracks. So they've got some work to do.
Certainly do have some work to do, as you were saying, Pin Man. Anything you want to add to that?
Me, no. Yeah, it's good that it's at the top of the show, because it's just, as I say, I think that the discussion, not having a shot, George, but I just think that that's it's a furphy, the discussion about whether we should have been in that position. Because who knows whether we should have or we shouldn't have. Of course, it would have been much better to have been, to have gone to tempo footy and maintain the 16-point lead or whatever the case was. But it would still be a completely different discussion if Nibbler had gone back and bananaed it through and we'd won the game. And as I think Jared makes the point, leave it to the players. That's the problem. Non-decisions. You've made this point a number of times, Andy, is that it's the decisions that aren't made are as impactful as the ones that are made. And these two, the one Zach Bailey one and this one, are perfect examples of that.
All right. Let's move on. I don't know, B-Man, if you want to talk about the fact that we were 16 points up, but I think it is relevant. We did have a lot of chances going forward throughout the game and we didn't take them, whether it was the inaccurate kicking. What did we kick? 14-11 to their 15-6 or wasting inside 50 entries. We had a lot more inside 50 entries. And then when we went to 16 points up with 7 or 8 minutes to go, it was at that point that as I mentioned before, I breathed a sigh of relief and thought, we've dodged a bullet here and we'll probably win this by 30 points. That the old Melbourne would blow this and somehow manage to lose, but not this Melbourne, the new Melbourne. We can get into trouble, but now we know how to fight our way out of trouble. But I don't know. My MFCSS might be back. Am I overreacting here? I'm going to ask George because I know what your answer is going to be, man, for a sec. George, 16 points up. Should we have lost?
Well, I'll throw it back to you, Andy, because we were watching on the television and you were there seeing it live. The impression I got was that structures had actually broken down. Normally our defensive structures wouldn't have allowed that last mark to Walker, certainly, and even the preceding one to Fogarty. So can you tell us what was going or what wasn't going on that's been happening before?
It's hard for me because when I watch the footy, I'm not like B-Man. I think B-Man's a lot more. He looks at those structures and I'm sort of just looking at the ball, and I guess I'm a bundle of nerves, and particularly at that stage. But I think May was beaten on the day. Very rarely that he does get beaten, and I think Tex had the better of him for most of the day, and I don't know. Yeah, maybe the structures did let us down. But as I said, I was a bundle of nerves at the time, so I wasn't sort of looking behind the ball as well. So no, I can't help you there, George. But I didn't think we should have lost from that situation.
No, that was certainly the case. But from the television, and I know May was very upset at various points during the game about what wasn't happening around him, and I don't know whether that was because he was having a lousy game or the addition of or subtraction of someone like Salem, who would have been sitting in that gap that was in front of Walker or sitting in the gap in front of Fogarty. That would have completely changed the game. So it's hard to say from the television footage. At the end of the day, they did, and hopefully the coaches are looking at that situation if that was the genuine situation that was occurring.
Working back from the question about the 16 points, I think that what we didn't do in this match that we've done really well in other matches is that we didn't go to tempo footy, and we let them win the next. I think it was the very next. Did they kick the goal directly after Oliver's goal to put us 16 points up?
It was very close. Yeah, it wasn't. It wasn't that long.
It was symbolic of actually the whole game because they got a clean entry, even though we did better than in clearances, and we'll talk about this. But they got a clean entry and got it in. But after that point, we didn't go to tempo footy until right near the end of the game when Lever tried to slow it down, but we only had a 5-point lead there. And so it's a bit late. You need to go to tempo footy with, even after that goal, which would made it 11 points. That's when we needed to take time out of the clock. And they never did that until Lever tried to slow it down with 3 minutes to go. Now, there's the other free, that Keys was definitely free kicked against Keys. And it was both of those things I think we contributed to. Petrarca took it out of the hands almost of Keys, and it sort of felt a bit like that gave the out for the umpire. And the other thing at the end of the game is only Nibbler appealed for the out of bounds, and I thought, normally they all go nuts, and I just wondered whether if they all, in hindsight, it was someone made this point on Demonland, and I thought it was a good one. If they all threw their hands up in the air like they normally do, would have that been enough to somehow jar that out of the umpire's brain to not do anything? But we just once we got the 16 points, I thought we were going to keep rolling. And before that, we made a critical error. We broke. And again, this would have been something that George would have been great to see at the ground, because the umpire, in the call, they mentioned it. But what Oliver won it on the halfback flank brilliantly. He was, we'll talk about his half of footy. But he beautifully got the ball, won a contested ball, ran forward with it and handballed it to Petrarca, and Petrarca fumbled and they went back down, and that they scored not long afterwards, I think. The commentators were suggesting that it was free ahead of Petrarca. Do you remember that play, Andy?
No, I can't. Not in particular.
Yeah,
it's just so loud and.
Yeah, again, as George says, it's really hard on the television. They should have showed it down the shot, but the commentators were suggesting we were completely open ahead of the ball, so so we could have possibly transitioned. Then we would have gone out to 22 points, and maybe that would have been enough. So I just think, unlike in those situations, we've been much better at controlling the tempo and slowing things down. There's an overall thing. I think that the key things that we didn't do that we haven't been doing, and is defensive pressure and defensive running, and pressure across the game. Like, our pressure was okay, but theirs was better. They were terrific. That shouldn't be forgotten. I thought they were, they played great footy, and we only really ever matched them for pressure, I reckon, and then only in the last quarter. But we clearly didn't do enough defensive running. The Grimes Times on Demonland noted that our average, the first time this year, our average speed in attack was greater than our average speed in defence, and that I reckon that's a really good indication that we didn't work hard defensively enough. And that's why I think it was so easy for them to transition, because we scored all right. I mean, that was about our season average score to get, but it was, we've been keeping teams, I think, that coming into the game was an average 61 points against, and what did they end up? 90 odd points. Yeah. So we just couldn't stop them transitioning the ball, and even those ones through the centre that was highlighted by On the Couch and other sort of forums. That's a function of not getting your zone and across, and we've talked about it. How important that is. That whole zone that requires so much defensive running, and you can't really see that. You can see the pressure on the telly because it's all how hard people are going in and all of that. You can't see the defensive running because it's out of shot. But that clearly wasn't there, and that our game it's completely taken away from us if we're not right up at that high level of pressure. And I was actually, it sounds, I don't want to be smart in hindsight, but at halftime, Andy, I was actually really worried that we'd lose that game. I wasn't confident because our pressure was not there and our defensive running was not there, and players like Rivers and Jordan, who have been such important parts of our game, were just not on. Particularly Jordan, he had some horrible kicks, and Rivers too wasn't running across, and our forward half pressure was poor. So I thought we did pretty well to quote unquote get it back on our terms, which we did when we got it out to 16, really on the back of the phenomenal performance by Oliver. But really across the whole course of the game, they applied a lot more pressure than us, and our defensive running wasn't up for it.
And we were also very sloppy. There was a lot of drop marks. We got caught quite a few times. I don't know if that's because of the noise at the ground. They were a lot cleaner than us. If you want to join us tonight, 039016 3666, 039016 3666. We'll take your calls. If you want to join us in the chat room, www, or do we even say that anymore? Just demonland.com/podcast.
And Andy, just the other stat that was on Demonland, Nairobi Demon put up a good stat. The scores from turnovers they scored 76 from turnovers. Now it's a bit of a misleading stat because it sounds a bit like from when our errors, but it's as I understand it, scores from turnovers relate to when we've got the ball in our possession and they win it back. So then there's
it's
heaps
not
of
necessarily
turnovers.
From an error. It's just
it's not necessarily from an error. So there's three types of scoring: kick in. This was on Demonland as well. Kick in and from clearances and from turnovers. So when we win the ball back, Junior Mac clarified that. So stoppage, clearance, turnover, and from coast to coast kick in. So there's heaps of clearances, but the thing is, normally we win those contests forward of the ball. That's that stat about pressure ahead of the contest or after the clearance, post clearance pressure. That's our Onewood. We're number 2 now. We were number 1 behind the dog. We're number 2 behind the Dogs in that stat, but they killed us on it, and that goes to the lack of pressure. and the lack of running as well, because we're not trapping it in our forward half, and they were moving it from their back half, not just from their back half, but from other positions on the ground and scoring. But 76 points, I think 50 points I heard as well forward of the centre goals, which is huge. It just means that they, our pressure was down and theirs was way up to where it needs to be.
Well, let's talk about the individual performance, and the one that stood out the most was, of course, as we've mentioned a few times, Clayton Oliver, just a contested possession beast, one of the most complete games you could ask for from a midfielder. And this week he's added goals into the mix, which was one of you boys, I think, last week mentioned that that's what he needs to sort of complete, become that complete footballer. And 38 possessions, 27 contested. He's now outright leader of contested possessions for this year. 13 clearances, 11 score involvements, 9 tackles, which is incredible as well, 8 inside 50s, 626 metres gained, and 3 goals won. What more can you say? Those stats speak for themselves, particularly when you add that he went at 74% disposal efficiency and he had 94% of game time. I'll note as well, he's taken the lead in the AFL Coaches Award. He's 2 votes clear of Bontempelli and McCluggage. George?
Yeah, that was as good a game that I've seen from a Melbourne mid for the last 20 years, even in a losing side, as it turned out. He single-handedly, after half-time, dragged us into the game. The scores wouldn't have even been close if Clayton Oliver hadn't lifted it at halftime and showed the rest of them what they needed to do, and that's basically what it was all about. It's about doing good, honest, hard work and continuing to do it and running and keeping on trying. If he'd only had a few more helpers around, it would have been, without a doubt, a different result. It was fantastic. Last year, he kicked 3 goals in total for the whole year, and he's surpassed that in a single game, just to show how he's adding a different bow to his style all the time. Previous years, we've complained about him being a handball king. Now the kicking is just as lethal. He's going to be a serious contender when we come up to the Brownlow votes at the end of the year, and the only downside is he's playing alongside a bloke called Petrarca.
No, I see before B-Man gets on this. Our good mate Kane Corns has, as he always says, he has some contrarian view, but he's some controversial statement, and he said today that Oliver and Petrarca are, the best midfield duo ever, eclipsing Voss and who was with Voss and Natko Annis. I don't know who
Black.
Yeah, Black and Voss and the West Coast boys at the time, and obviously he's just trying to be controversial. I think Petrarca and Oliver need some premierships under their belt to sort of be in the conversation as good as they've been this year. They obviously need to have some silverware to back that up. But someone made an interesting point in that thread that they rarely play this incredible game at the same time. Like, it'd be both absolute. Like, Petrarca had a good game this week, but they're rarely outstanding together in the same game. And once that sort of clicks and happens, look out. But
yeah, Track still had 32
I know, I've got notes on him later, so we'll get to you.
We forget about that, but also, while Kane Corns, you have to take with a grain of salt because he's just trying to get some clickbait at the end of the day. I think we'll get a fairly good idea this weekend on Friday night about how good they are as a pair, because the opposition with McRae, who's had over 30 possessions in every game this year, alongside Liberatore, who just cuts people to shreds, and this third player they've got called Bontempelli, I think we'll get a fairly good idea about who's the best player and best combination pretty well in this coming Friday night's game.
And we'll talk about it later, but we're also lucky that Treloar and Dunkley aren't playing either, because they're handy additions to the team as well.
Yeah, which probably sums up our problems from this weekend. We've got 2 absolutely A-grade players playing alongside each other, and the next step down isn't the same as what the Bulldogs have got at the moment.
Yeah. B-Man, anything on Clary?
Just that I completely agree. If you narrow it down to a half of footy, I can't think of a better half of footy. Actually, I can think of one half of better footy than that And that was probably one of my all-time favourite memories at a game of football, was 9 goals in the second half of
The Wiz.
Collingwood Melbourne by the Wiz Farmer. But that would be the only game that comes close. Maybe there was a game Schwartz dominated at Vic Park and smashed them, but geez, it was incredible, wasn't it? And for me, actually, I think that I was really disappointed in the loss. So I said 4 or 5 weeks ago that the critical thing is we need to get to 10 wins. Here's the opportunity, because it's going to get tougher from here. The challenge for our game style is that is so based on pressure that's hard yakka to keep that level of pressure up for a 22 games, a 23-week home and away season. It really is. So there's always going to be drop-off. Richmond is the template. Dogs as well. They had the same level of pressure back in 2016, but I think they were 12 or 14 wins or something that year. So it's a game style. It's incredibly taxing, particularly for a young team. So, but for him to play that sort of level of game, the really disappointing thing was that I felt, apart from the fact that I would have loved to have got that 10, was that we didn't win it for him. In that sense of he put so much of himself in that. Afterwards, I thought, well, how could we lose that game given what he did? Almost it seemed disrespectful to Clary, because it was just a phenomenal performance. And it was interesting. I think you said, didn't you, Andy, got the 10 coaches' votes. And I don't know how often that happens in a losing game. And a lot of the talk post-game was how incredible that half of footy was. So, yeah, in the many years I've followed the Ds, that's right up there in terms of a performance.
I often feel that he doesn't get the credit from either the wider football community or even the commentators. And someone mentioned that I can't remember which outlet or maybe it was something on Twitter or somewhere, that they were plugging, or on radio, that they were plugging this upcoming game against the Bulldogs and mentioning all the players from both sides, and his name wasn't even mentioned as one of the highlighted players for the upcoming match. And I don't know, I find that a little bit disrespectful. And the other thing I'll talk about was, and I'll try and find it here, it was the AFL Coaches Award, the way they announced this week's results. I'm just pulling up AFL Coaches. Bear with me one sec while my computer loads. Yeah, this was their tweet. Bont, 10. Doggies, clean sweep votes. Fair enough, they've clean sweep the vote. 4 players joined Bont with perfect coaches' votes, and a new leader has fired up to the AFL Coaches Champion Player of the Year leaderboard. Picture of Bont. No, I mean, I replied to it. Strange way to not say that Clayton Oliver is now the leader of the AFL Coaches Award. They've even mentioned him. They've sort of alluded to him, but highlighted Bont and the Dogs. Yeah, I found that a bit disrespectful too. But
I think he's starting to get his credit now, like in terms of the sort of public and also the commentators. And I think that your point about him kicking goals is a good one, because it really changes the dynamic. And all of the 3 goals he kicked were, just fantastic. And obviously the one to put us 16 points up, I thought at that stage, great, this is, we're in here. So he if he can add that and add that to the mix, I think that it just, as I said last week, it takes him to that very top level. And it's interesting because I've always thought the umpires aren't huge on him, but he's polled not too bad in the Brownlow, but he's now into third favourite for the Brownlow at $8. So, and I think Bontempelli's favourite tracks up there. So there's maybe his 4th favourite, but I think that he's certainly getting noticed, and it was such a powerhouse game in a game that was, from a neutral perspective, it would have been a fantastic game to watch. And one of the things that neutrals would have come away with from that game is, wow, what a performance by Oliver.
It was. George, I was reading your match report, your fantastic match reports that, I don't know, you must start writing them as the game is either still going or is just finished, because they get into my inbox very, very quickly. And particularly after a loss, I don't even like to look at anything football, so I don't know how you do it. So thank you very much for that on behalf of myself and all other Demonlanders. But you weren't too keen on Max Gawn's game. You said even Max Gawn in the ruck was well below his best, despite the multiple marks and outscoring of the hit-out stat. He drop marks cost the side multiple goals. And whilst I agree with the drop marks, that was very Max-like, I thought he had a much better game than he has been the last couple of weeks. We noticed the last few weeks he's been a bit down, possibly because of the few weeks preceding that where his body was getting absolutely hit from pillar to post by a few bigger bodies. I thought he played a much better game. The 32 hit-outs, 9 to advantage, 20 possessions, 10 marks, 5 contested, 6 score involvements and the 1 goal. We'll talk about. I'll talk about the throw-in after I get your thoughts on Max. But yeah, George, you're...
Yeah, it was really difficult. He's obviously not playing at 100%. Sadly, in this game, there are those couple of events with the drop marks in particular, which did cost us both forward and back, and those become quite noticeable to everyone. The other thing that I'm not quite positive on, because I wasn't there at the game, was I think we actually got back into that 16-point lead in the last quarter when Jackson was rucking.
Yeah, you mentioned this in your report as well. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about that, but Jackson was certainly rucking through the middle of that last quarter. Jackson, I think, was providing much more for us in terms of that additional mid and gives us that ability to get clean clearances. Max was, from my perspective, and again, it's only on television, had reverted to the swatting type of techniques in the rucks. That he's just not getting off the ground, and I suspect he's carrying something and has been for a couple of weeks. So, do you want to talk about that? I was really
let's talk about
negative on that last 10 seconds, that last couple of that last ruck contest. Look, it's very hard because we're not in that situation, but the opposition ruckman cannot hit the ball through the goals, and in this case, they had no intention of doing exactly that. Max can. And the very least he could have done was hit the ball towards the goal, which would have put the Adelaide defenders under extreme pressure. They can't walk it through because they're either going to give us a point or they're going to be penalised for, if the umpire will blow the whistle, for not keeping it in play again. And he took it out of the ruck. And of course, you're going to be tackled when you've got 36 players at this point in the game, all within 5 or 10 metres of you. Just hit it towards the goal and see what happens. It wasn't very smart from my perspective.
So what do you think that is? Is that it's not an experience? I don't know what that is. As a captain, he should have probably realised that. And
yeah, I know. Like I said, it's difficult in the heat of the moment, and they would have known how long to go. People say that that's not the case, but they've got people on the boundary telling them, less than a minute, less than 10, 20 seconds. It's not going to go anywhere else other than our forward line, even if all you're seeing is the last 30 seconds of a game or something like that. It was disappointing. But that's just what happens sometimes. Hopefully they learn about that. When you play enough games, you'll learn how to win games in those sort of scenarios or avoid the loss. Paul Roos was always an excellent at that sort of capability in his role over the years in Sydney, and he's instilled it into Longmire as well. We probably haven't learned about it yet. We've got to get to that point.
Well, do you go for the draw? I understand those 2 points could be important, as B-Man said at the beginning of the show, that it could be the difference between a top 4 spot or definitely a home final, which makes a huge difference at that time of the year.
You go for the draw at that point at the very least, and the reason you go for the draw, of all the clubs that should know about missing out on finals by a goal or missing out on finals because we didn't win a game that we should have won, it's this club. So at that point, 2 points will make and could make all the difference between a home final or a non-home final, top four or not. We already know that it's the difference between making finals or not.
What happened last year? Collingwood's draw in the end against Richmond got them in the finals over us.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's happened. We can't do anything about it now, and hopefully they've learned something and they'll review it and look at it.
Bin Man, should Max have played the percentages and attempted to punch the ball towards goal?
That was a thread asking that question on Demonland, and my sort of first instinct was yes. Sort of in hindsight, I think, well, like you play for the win, I guess, but also it's an unusual thing to do. So his players would have, if he didn't get it over the line, all of his players are out of position, position, I should say, and it risks giving the ball back to them. So, there's an assumption made that he would actually get it over the line. However, I guess I'm swayed by what George has just said. The other thing is, he wouldn't have known. But if he had got through for a point, there was time actually for the kick out. If we'd manned up, which of course we would have had time to win it back, and all we would have needed is a point, obviously, because the scores would have been level at that point. So that pressure so the clock would have had about 10 seconds if he got through in that first one.
Yeah, about 10 seconds.
Yeah, and meaning that it doesn't start until he kicks it, isn't it? Or he leaves the square. So he leaves the square, he then kicks it to a contest. He presumably would try to kick it as far down the line as he could. But if a Melbourne player like a Steve May or something marked it even outside 50, gets onto a top, then, they would have potentially had a chance to still win it with the 2 points banked. So that would have been a funny feeling for you. And if we'd ended up with a draw, leaving the Adelaide Oval would have been better than the loss. So, I've never been actually to a game. I'm trying to think. Don't think I've ever been to a game live in a draw, but it'd be a funny feeling. But as you say, 2 points would have been huge, and also it would have taken out the percentage for us, or in all likelihood, with the Bulldogs or any other team really, because unless another one of those top four teams got a draw, percentage is no longer in the equation. So I sort of went back and forward on it, but I think you've convinced me, George. You should have snapped it over and spiked it into the crowd, and that would have razzed up the Adelaide crowd. They would have been booing it, no doubt.
Oh yes.
It would have been worth the price of admission just to see him spike it into the Melbourne cheer squad.
Well, no, it was the other end of the ground.
That would have been even better.
Yeah.
Adelaide cheer squad. If you want to give us a call, talk about anything, 0390163666, 0390163666. Join us in the chat room, demonland.com/podcast. I thought Lever played a good game, 24 possessions, 12 contested, 8 marks, 17 intercepts. And is there a time limit, and it's probably a stupid question to ask a Melbourne supporter, on how long you can continue to boo a player that leaves your club? Because the poor guy was booed pillar to post. I'd be embarrassed to repeat some of the things that I heard some people say. They'd probably make a sailor blush. But I suppose we can't really comment, because I guess I'd still be booing Scully if he was still playing against us. So maybe that's a moot point to talk about. It's interesting to say he had a good game, because, I guess on those numbers he did, but I felt a little bit as if he was, I don't know, a little bit timid at the contest. I don't know, maybe I'm seeing things, but the push in the back it was given against him was just a woeful free kick, but he sort of put his hands up. He did put his hands in.
Like, I'm sorry that was there. And I was like, what are you doing? That was not a free kick. Why are you sort of placating the player or the umpire? And then similar thing with the when he got pinged for deliberate too, didn't he?
So that was, look, he was handballing to Petty. He got sort of, it wasn't tackled, but he was sort of pushed or semi-tackle, was attempted tackle, and his hand was pushed as he's handballing it, forcing the ball in a different direction, which went out, and that was called holding the deliberate, and they got a goal from that, I'm pretty sure.
Which was, you add that one to the Spargo one, to them not paying that one against O'Brien at the end, and you add those things together and your brain's just going to explode, really. But on that one where he didn't seem to remonstrate either, like he just seemed a bit passive, but maybe I'm being a bit tough on him.
The worst part about that particular one was the Adelaide player shepherded the ball over the boundary line and stopped Jaden Hunt from actually getting to it.
You shouldn't be allowed to do that. That should be maybe a free kick against that guy because he didn't make a sufficient effort to stop the ball from going out. I don't know if that's a thing, but I don't like how they let it go out.
It was initially when it came in. I have a vague memory of players getting pinged for shepherding it, for not taking it, because it's the same.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, and if you think in terms of the result, they got a goal from that because he kicked, I think it was that little, the commentator's son, whatever his name is, for Adelaide. He put that through, and I'm pretty sure they got a goal subsequent to the Spargo one as well. And they definitely got a goal from the hands in the back. And obviously they got a goal from Keys, although someone should have been in that leading lane in front of Walker. That was the other thing where the number of times where he had open leading lanes is just not on, like in terms of defensive zones and coverage. And Lever arguably could have been back in that zone to block that path. But nonetheless, that's 3 goals that they've got from one not being paid a free kick and 3 dubious free kicks if you count the Lever in the back. And they made us pay, obviously. So that was the other thing. We missed some shots. But, that's 3-4 goals right there.
I just wanted to mention Langdon because, he's had 27 possessions and 2 goals. And I really like the fact that he's hitting the scoreboard this year quite a bit. I was going to look up how many goals he had kicked this year as opposed to last year because I'm pretty sure it would be much more. I mean, there's nothing else really more to say than that. I just wanted to add that. I thought he was amongst our better players.
Yeah,
he was, but sorry, George, just except there was 1 or 2 bits or one play in particular where he elected not to take it and tried to tap it down to Petrarca in our defensive 50 and they scored from it. And there was another play that Harms did something similar and it just felt a little bit like a bit Hollywood, a bit sort of, not disrespectful, but just do the basic things and do them. And so, I was a bit disappointed in both those bits of play, actually.
That's all right. People that can happen in a game. Yeah, George?
I think I asked this question last week. I want to know where they got the invisibility cloak for him. He just sits out there and nobody seems to be on him for whole lengths of period during the game. But it's great to have a wingman who's playing the classic wingman role, and he does it so very well for us. And he's a critical component in terms of us getting the ball from the back line, because that's where we've set up our basic game plan is intercepting and control from the back line, and he's the link man that gets it up forward. And traditionally it's Salem on the other side of the ground as well. But he's been fantastic for us, and again, fabulous recruiting to get that sort of player because we certainly need him.
I think we need another one like him on the other side. I'm not convinced with Brayshaw as a wingman. And I'll just say 17 games last year, Langdon kicked 2 goals, 8, and he's had from 10 games, 10 goals, 3 this year. So that's good. His best effort was in 2018 for Freo 11-11 from 21 games. So he's well on track to beat that.
Lots of people point out the similarities visually between him and Hunt, particularly when they're both wearing the long sleeves. But I reckon, George, that Hunt might have borrowed his invisibility cloak and taken it a bit too far because he was pretty invisible for the whole match.
Well, he wasn't invisible for 2 of the 3. He got absolutely caught running with the ball. Whether he couldn't hear that someone was behind him or whatever, I was disappointed with his game. Petrarca, said we'd talk about him. 32 possessions, 16 contested, 11 clearances, 8 score involvements, 11 inside 50. Takes him. He's currently leading that stat He's 4 ahead of Bontempelli, but I don't know how dangerous he is. I would like to see what his conversion rate in terms of our scores. I don't know if they dig down into those stats. Either of you familiar with that?
Well, certainly one of those 11 that kick to was definitely a goal. That kick to Fritsch was just incredible, wasn't it? At the start of the third quarter. That was just fantastic. 55-metre kick to the goal square and hit the dime. And so I think his score involvements, I mean, I suspect because he gets depth on them. Do you mean when he's kicking or when he's...
No. So he's doing very well. I think he's definitely in the top 3 or top 2 for score involvements, but I'm talking about inside 50s. He's leading the league of getting the ball inside, kicking it into 50. I assume that's what that stat is. And I'm just wondering what the conversion rate into scoring from that is. Not necessarily score involvements. But
I'm not sure, but they're fixing the road right outside.
I can do that. What are you
It's like, they're doing their best to shut down the Petrarca talk. But I don't know what those numbers are. I thought he was a little bit fumbly. I mean, like, they're crazy numbers. And I think that we've just now expected him to, he must be he must be 30-plus average for the season possessions, surely now, Andy, because he was 29 earlier or 30. So, but he made a couple of errors where he fumbled the ball, which was really unlike him, actually, including the one that I mentioned before, which I think really helped them get back into the game. And but he's just a beast, really. His ability to stand up in tackles and is something to see. And he's all over the ground. He must be sort of really super fit now. So it will be fantastic. Hopefully we'll get to see it on the weekend. But him versus that midfield of the Dogs will be something to see.
I think the other advantage again this week was I think he spent 94% time on ground. So when you've got a player of that capability just constantly in the game, and the remaining 6% is a minute or two, probably either side of half time, he's basically on the ground the whole game. So he's a real threat. And I think the other thing he's really learned, particularly in the last 2 years, is using his strength to kick the ball deep into attack. And I don't think the forwards have capitalised on that capability yet. So hopefully that'll change in coming weeks, months.
Yeah, and I loved, speaking of kicking with depth, I love him going back and kicking that goal. Was it in the last quarter where he took it on himself? He got arguably a dubious free kick. Certainly if you're a Crows fan, you'd be saying it was dubious. And he went back from outside 50 and slotted it. So that sort of, for me, was real leadership and something that I think that's an area of his game. He's really gone up a level in his maturity, and he acts and looks and has the bearing of a leader in that footy club.
Averaging 29 disposals this year, but his career average is 20. So he's gone up a hell of a lot this year. Just how much did we miss Christian Salem? Do you think Neville Jetta was the right replacement? Just maybe start with you, George.
We missed Christian Salem a terrible lot, and from the sounds of things, he's going to be available this week. Sadly, and I said this a couple of times when Neville played earlier in the season, I saw the same thing. The mind is willing, but the body no longer is. Particularly, it started in the first quarter, the first couple of opportunities that Adelaide, when the ball came into the forward line, Neville was just trailing his man, almost treading water while his man's running ahead of him. And that's why I asked you, Andy, about the structure in the back line. I think we've got such a strong structure that we've built around having people like Tomlinson in there and Salem in there. And when you start replacing those people, it takes a while to get things right, as we've seen with Petty. I think he's now slotting in nicely. But Neville, I don't think, unfortunately, is the right person, and we'll get to it later. But I suspect that Bowie is going to have an opportunity very soon because I don't think Neville can hold his place in the side any longer.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised the way they set up, and there was a few things. Is that one with Jets, that wasn't a like for like. I mean, the role that Salem plays is the halfback distributor role. He gets up the ground. I can only imagine that they wanted Jets in for his experience, and maybe they thought he was a good fit for row. I'm not sure if he played on row, but to get some experience in the team. I've said before, it's our biggest Achilles heel is our small defender. So maybe they thought that there was a role for him in against their smalls. He's a neat kick. He doesn't miss many, but he's not a like for like. And so I thought that was strange selecting him. I thought they would have been much better. Spot on, George, in terms of the structure. It wasn't the week to change structures. We really needed to, with Salem going out, we instead of creating more sort of changes to the structure, they needed to look. I thought it was curious that they didn't. They needed to find ways to make it the same structure, and the way for me to do that was to bring Jordan back into the halfback flank because he's a good kick. He's basically was playing high halfback anyway for the most of the season before he went into the middle. He clearly needs a bit of a chop out. He's looking like he's struggling a bit, and he would have played that role, Salem's role, perfectly. I reckon. Run off the halfback flank. He can play high. Jets just as soon as Jets was outside the 50-metre arc, as you say, George, he looks completely exposed now, doesn't he? And you can see he's trying to drag his opponent down and use his strength, but it's of no real value outside the 50-metre arc. It's only a real value when you can be crumbing inside 50 and the ground ball gets. But so I thought that was a funny thing that for me, Jordan back halfback flank and Captain Jack Sparrow come into the side and him play as the mid. For me, that was the move because I want Captain Jack back in that team, but he's also someone we could have done with his ferocity and attack on the footy, and he's a bit of a blunt instrument, but we needed a blunt instrument for this game and allow Jordan, whose one of his strengths is his kicking, and that's really taken away from his strength playing in the centre. So for me, that was a bit of a miss potentially. But the other one I thought was really strange from the structure, George, was the way they played Petty. For me, it didn't make any sense because Petty has come in to replace Tomlinson. For 2.5 seasons, the structure has been Omac first and then Tomlinson replacing Omac as that sweeper full back roll. Deep, always deep. And this time they swapped it around, and Petty's only his third game into that playing that role. He's come in to replace Tomlinson. You've got to bed that structure down, but they put him on May and allowed him to go high and May back deep. And I can see perhaps why they might want to have done that because Walker getting his marks up on the half forward flank for us. He's not kicking goals from back there, but he really took Petty to task, didn't he? He won a couple of important marking contests. But maybe they were thinking, well, that will leave May to be dominant down in the back half and Maxie dropping back. But as you both noted, Max was dropping his marks and May had just a shocker, his worst game of the season. So I thought it was a strange decision from a coaching decision to not only not replace Salem with a like for like, but doubling down on the lack of mucking around with the structure and playing Petty in a completely different role to how he's going to be playing for the rest of the season and how he has up till in his 3 games or in the 2 games that he's played before that. So, and to me, they wouldn't have done that. And the other thing that I thought was they wouldn't have done that against a team like the Blues. Well, they didn't the previous week, for instance. They could have easily done the same thing and put May back on he was deep. But so the other thing was Salem getting rested, essentially, managed. And I reckon that was a strange decision. That's what I was saying last week is they should go in with the best team they can, get the win, and rest him against the Dogs if need be. I'd rather us have got that win and than him being fresh for the Dogs game. And because if we lose that, it's not the same. It's like this was the chance to get 10 zip. You put your very best team in, and he was managed. So he could have played, presumably, and they wanted him fresh for the Dogs. He's fit, apparently. So, yeah, I thought that was a strange decision all round. And
do you think he was rested, or they were worried that he was, injured? Because you'd think a groin, maybe because a groin, it's at least 2 or 3 weeks, and if he's playing this week, and we'll see if he is playing.
Well, by all accounts, he's probably struggled with it for some time, and they thought this was the chance. But as I said, he's clearly been rested. He's playing this week, so managed is probably the more accurate way they'd describe it. But I would have preferred him playing this week last week than this week, to be honest.
Let's move on to forward line.
James Harms.
Oh, yeah. Well, James Harms we can talk about. George, I know that you weren't very complimentary about him in the thing. He was well beaten. I don't know. I haven't been a fan of his. He's definitely not the tagger that he was in 2018. I thought we were playing better with him out of the team, and obviously I'd love Jack Viney in, but he's still a few weeks away, so take it away.
Yeah, I think that's the basic line, isn't it, that James Harms is not Jack Viney. In this game, I counted his first 5 possessions were clangers again of some sort. Keys had 21 disposals to half time, and you sort of go, well, what's the point of having Harms in the middle if his opposition players getting that much touch? As Binman said, I think Sparrow would have been a far better bet, and maybe even if you want to keep Harms in the side, he might have been a better player off the halfback role, although he hasn't been successful at that in the past. He's just not what he was in 2018 when he was unstoppable. But it's going to be a difficult decision this week, again, with no Viney from the looks of things, but I'd still be looking to get Sparrow through as a longer-term option.
Yeah, no, he did a couple of things that he's prone to over his time, where he does go for a bit Hollywood. I mean, where he tries the tricky thing, not the simple thing.
Yeah.
It's like he gets ahead of himself a little bit, and it's just not the thing to do in any game. They were on. Adelaide were on, and they were really putting pressure on our ball carriers, which is why we haven't sort of discussed it yet. But essentially, that's why the clearance count wasn't an issue for them, because again, it's exactly the reverse of what we were talking about. For instance, in the Carlton Melbourne game, is that majority of our efforts to clear the ball from the centre, for instance, and also around the ground stoppages were under massive amount of pressure. And I thought their rucks did a good job of nullifying Max's sort of influence in that sense. So even though we were getting them, every time we kicked them, they were under pressure. They would dump kicks in. And, that was a big factor in why they were able to score 76 points. I mean, their total score was, 96? To get 76 of their points from winning the ball back from us just is an incredible stat, actually. And it really speaks to how much pressure they were putting on the ball carrier. Their model is very similar in that respect to Melbourne and Richmond and the Bulldogs and that sort of chaos, high-pressure football. Really hard way of playing week in, week out, which is why a young team like the Crows, they'll win their share of games when they bring that sort of pressure. And particularly at home when they get their tails up. And we really struggled to kick it well. And I think there's the advantage the Dogs have is that they're also a high-pressure team, but they've got so many elite kicks. I mean, really, we've got Salem. You could probably put Melksham into that category. Jordan. Maybe... that's about it, to be honest. They've got McRae, Bontempelli, even Bailey. They've got 5, 6
Hunter,
Daniels, Hunter. Who are all at Salem's level. And so, under pressure, they'll still hit their targets, won't they? Or they're more likely to, because their technique's robust and can stand up to pressure. So, that was a big factor, their pressure. And Harms is a player who, under pressure, just seemed to try too much sometimes, where it's, he's a frustrating player, and he played well the first week, dropped off, and I don't know where that leaves him when Miney comes back. I think up forward, pressure forward is where I'd like to see him ultimately, taking Melcham's place perhaps. But yeah, I thought he was really disappointing, particularly we needed another grunt player, didn't we? Because our young players looked like they were gassed a bit. So we need, that's when you need your 100-game player to crack in and really sort of influence the game.
All right, move on to the forward line. We had a lot of bit players. When you just look at the goal stats, we had Tom McDonald won, Sam Weideman won, Pickett won, Fritsch won. But then you have a look at the stats and it's really not that impressive, really not getting a lot of the ball. Weideman's had 9 possessions, only taken 3 marks. He's had 4 tackles, which I'm sure, George, you'll be happy with. But T-Mac stats were much better, 10 possessions, 3 marks, 3 tackles and the goal. Did we make a mistake by dropping Brown? It was a beautiful day. It's a hard one to answer because then you look at the beautiful day we had at Casey the other day and Ben Brown had 4 possessions and took, I think, two marks or something and didn't even kick a goal.
Do you want me to run with this one, Andy?
Yeah, I'm at a loss. I don't know. Go for it.
All right. I think we did make a mistake. Having Ben Brown in the side, I think somebody on Demonland pointed this out, was that he almost takes two defenders. Weideman, unfortunately, in my assessment, hasn't got the same physical presence as what Brown has. And when Brown was there, all of a sudden, T-Mac and Fritsch blossom. With Weideman there, that certainly didn't happen. Of his 4 tackles, I think 3 of them were on the wing when he came off the interchange bench, and the game was right in front of him.
Okay.
They weren't occurring in the forward line. And when you combine that with Fritsch and Melcham, who had 0 tackles between them as well for the whole game, it really tells you the story that Binman was talking about before about the lack of forward pressure. We're not going to be successful at the pointy end of the season while we've got 3 or 4 players in the forward line who simply aren't putting pressure on the opposition. If the mids have spent all their time and effort getting it in there, only to see it bounce back over their heads again. So I don't think Weideman's the answer. It'll be interesting, the Brown scenario, Ben Brown scenario at Casey. I was wondering whether he's been told just to play it easy because Casey played on Sunday. So with the match on Friday, a few players might have been told don't go too hard because we might need you to select you in less than 5 days' time. So it'll be an interesting scenario what will happen this week, but at the moment Weideman isn't providing what we thought he would, and in this game, of all the games so far in the season where he's had the opportunity, he should have really should have exerted himself far much more than what he did.
I was going to ask Andy whether you know the stats of those 4, whether any were inside 50, because my suspicion was exactly that. They were up around the wing and, from memory, not particularly consequential tackles either. I'm losing patience, I have to say, with Weideman. This was a game where we needed someone to stand up. T-Mac had a quiet night. He still applied some pressure but couldn't get into the game. That's a really good point about the structure, George, because Brown plays deep from that and creates space around him, doesn't he? And so it's not just bringing in Weideman, because if we look at the numbers, and there's a clip that we might play, Andy, if we've got time around that forward pressure, but is that our pressure in the first half was down across the whole board. So when we think about defence, you have to think of the whole team's defensive effort, and that includes the forwards, because our game, as we've talked about, is based on trapping the ball in our forward half. That means that all your forwards need to be applying incredible pressure to do that. And so Brown even if he's not tackling, he's bringing the ball to ground in front of him, which allows the nibblers and A and Bs to get in there and trap the ball. Whereas Weideman doesn't. He just doesn't seem to get involved in that way. Aerially, he's also didn't seem to get involved. So, it's very predictable the way Brown plays. He's going to be leading straight up the centre of the ground. Players can form around him. I wasn't even quite sure what role Weideman was playing because he didn't seem to be. He was out of the square sometimes, but they because they were running back in numbers and because they were pressuring and they were doing exactly to us what we try to do to other teams, he didn't have much space to operate in. And he just doesn't seem to have, you've made this point a number of times in the last year or so, George, he doesn't impose himself physically on a game. And so in a crowded space like that, a young bull like him, he should be taking packs apart. If there's someone in his way, he should be running through him. And he just, as you say, I don't know how many possessions. What was his numbers, Andy? He wouldn't have got more than 8-9 kicks, I wouldn't have thought.
Nine, 3 marks, 4 tackles and a goal.
Yeah, I mean, and, it's just, that's where you need a player like him to say, I'm going to influence the result of this game. And it just doesn't seem to be, that game against Hawthorn in 2018 was his high watermark so far. And it seems that there's a lot hanging on that sort of game in terms of what his potential might be. But he just hasn't done enough for me to convince me. Why did Brown go? So that was about that decision to try something, which tells me something about the way they approach this game. It's not the game to try. They picked Brown first for a reason. Brown, he was no more impressive than Brown the previous week. So why did they, what did Brown do to come out of the side? I would have kept Brown in for the reasons George noted and made Weideman go back and kick another bag and get some inside bloody 50 tackles. I wouldn't pick him again until he got an inside 50 tackle because I've made this point 3 weeks ago. You can't have Fritsch. I mean, Terence made he was very prescient comment about Fritsch because since then he hasn't laid a tackle inside 50. You can't have Melksham, Fritsch, Weideman applying no forward in half pressure. It just doesn't work in both our game plan, but also against the sort of the Dogs or any of the Lions who are ferocious inside 50. It's just not going to fly. So I'm as I say, I'm fast losing patience with him and don't know. I reckon he's at crossroads in terms of his career, actually.
So what do we do with him? I'm not convinced he's going to make it. I've been waiting and waiting. He clunk marks. He's just not doing it. He's not getting enough of the ball. He's not kicking goals and not even counting any 7 goals he kicked for KC because that's obviously a level below. Well, what do we do? Do we look at
back at Casey and then the fellow we brought in and
Brown that's the short term. I'm talking about career wise. What do we do with him? Because do we trade him to Collingwood and try and go again? Because look, T-Mac's not young. Brent Brown's not getting any younger. We don't have really another key position player of that age.
I think Weideman will determine his own future, Andy. If he wants to be serious about this, he's got to start showing something, and to date he hasn't. This is his 6th season.
Yeah, I'm not convinced it's going to happen.
And as someone again on Demonland said in the game day sort of or the post match thing, it's pointless playing players hoping they will come good.
Mm.
Well, particularly as I say in his 6th season, and that's when this was the game when we were off across the board. I think that might have been Goodwin in his presser said, if in footy now, if you're even a few percent off, then you'll get beaten. And we were across the board, we were off. And that's when you need players someone has to stand up and do something different or special. And we had Oliver showing what needed to be done. And now, of course, I'm not expecting Weideman to play at that level, but he, find a way to influence the game. And that's what the really good players do, is that even if they've had a quiet game, they find a way to influence, which is, it's critical of Weideman, but even more senior player, a player we brought to the club in Melksham, where was his leadership in this game? Where was his, sure, his kicks look beautiful. Those kick to Gawn, that was lovely. His kick to Weideman, actually, perfect, no worries. But where was his heart at it? I'm going to win this footy. I'm going to win this game. He's on the bench getting his ankle strapped. So it really both of those players, I think, where do they fit within the way we've constructed our footy team?
B-Man, do you want me to play that audio? Do you need to preface?
Yeah, so this was from that show from Sunday night. What's it called?
First Crack,
and which it's a really I quite like it, and I'm sort of the king's growing on me. But Lee Montagne's on it as well, and he's really good. Morris is not so good, and it's a stat about the importance of contested possessions, and that we're and in a general sense, so in their midfield, but then contested possessions in the forward half. So it's sort of relevant to this discussion about pressure or lack thereof from our mids, and also the discussion about McDonald and Weideman and Brown.
So they've done sort of a midfield audit from rounds 5 to 10. They had some graphics on the screen, and I'll just say this before they go to the video. They had rounds 5 to 10. From the midfield, Geelong are leading 175 contested possession. Brisbane are second, 113 contested possessions. Western Bulldogs third, 89 contested possession, and then we're fourth at plus 68 contested possessions. Then they talk about the forward half, and we've dropped out of there. It's Geelong, Brisbane, Western Bulldogs and GWS have come in, but Geelong, they're plus 81, Brisbane plus 40, Western Bulldogs plus 18, GWS plus 7, and then I guess I don't know what we're on, but we've dropped out of that. That's in forward half. I'll play the audio now.
Kingy, you've done a midfield audit.
Just want to track this in the next few weeks, so we'll just table it tonight, okay? If your midfield's in good form and your team's in good form, you generally have a good contested possession result. The last 6 weeks, Geelong, toughest team in the comp. Brisbane, Dogs and Melbourne round out the top 4. So strong numbers there, differential to your opponent, so head-to-head. So if your midfield's in form, you can keep numbers forward of the ball. You can keep your structure. You can hold 6 forwards. You can roll them up if you want. Doesn't matter what you do, but basically it means you can play your way if your midfield's in form. So then look to the forward half. So winning contests in your forward half means you're scoring.
Yeah.
Basically means you're scoring. So there's your top 4 there. So critically, Melbourne drop out of that discussion and GWS come in, which is an interesting discussion in itself. The other 3 show why they're so strong at the moment. Geelong, the Dogs and Brisbane, winning ball forward of centre. So Melbourne have got some decisions to make. Brown, Weideman, McDonald, is he going to maintain form? Gawn, can they use him more forward? Does Petrarca need to spend more time forward again? Because this is it. Yep. This is everything. And people say, but we're 9-1, we don't need to look at that sort of stuff. Of course you do. That's what the home and away period is for. So you and I are big on this.
Yep.
Consecutive contests in a row give you scores. This is going to be something we're going to track pretty heavily.
It's a good one for Melbourne. While they're going so well, just to trial it, maybe it is Clayton Oliver. Just sacrifice a little bit of your midfield game. We know you can get 40. Maybe just play a bit more in our front half to help clean up, winning a bit more ground ball inside forward 50. Just something they can play around with, because they've got the luxury of winning so many games early.
In one word, are you a Weideman man or a Brown man at the moment of the Demons?
I'm probably still Ben Brown. I think Ben Brown, he kicks goals. He's reliable.
What are you, Kingy?
Don't put your pain onto us, mate. We don't really care.
Sit on the fence. Unusual for you. More to come on First Crack after this.
All right.
And that period of time is we've dropped off since the Richmond game, haven't we?
Yeah, that's rounds 5 to 10.
Yeah. And that's like, I don't know, I mean, in that, so in that last 6 weeks, that picks up the Richmond game, and we've definitely dropped off in our performances since then. And I reckon that's a really interesting one in terms of, our forward path pressure hasn't been strong. It also coincides with Weideman, Brown coming back into the team, and Melksham. And I think that, as they point out, you've got to be winning, particularly if you're a territory team. That doesn't matter if you're West Coast Eagles, because they're not a team that looks to trap it in the forward half. They're a systems team that moves it, holds the ball. That's their whole model. So they have incredibly lower number of inside 50s. So for them, it's neither here nor there, or not to the same extent anyway. But for a team like us, who's all about forward half territory, to be dropping off in that stat's a real worry.
I'm very worried about the next 2 weeks, particularly because we're playing 2 of those teams that are high up on those stats. Very worried.
Good reason too, Andy. They are very, as Jake Lever said in his interview this week, they are the benchmark at the moment, the Bulldogs, and we'll find out about how serious we are and where we really sit on Friday night.
Let's talk changes, I guess. It's an interesting one. For mine, I think I would like to change that forward line a bit. I think Weideman comes out, Ben Brown comes in. I don't know if that's necessarily what's going to happen, but that's what I would do. Salem obviously comes back in. Unfortunately, Jets will go out. Where to, boys? Who else?
I'd like to propose my border collie.
Yes.
She runs all day. She's very focused. You don't want to get between her and the ball, and she can get the ball. She's cheap to employ, and like a lot of our players, she doesn't tackle very well, so that should get her a game.
So she'll probably still tackle better than Melksham. Surely Melksham, I don't, we've talked about not knowing the roles and all of that, but surely Melksham has to get dropped. And Fritchard's lack of inside pressure, inside 50 pressure is a worry too. But he's not going to be dropped in terms of his sort of importance to the structure. But where does Melksham fit in that? Well, you just simply cannot carry Fritch and Melksham in the same team, because you can't. It's not a workable solution to expect your three small forwards to be the ones getting your 15, 20 tackles. We need to be 20 plus tackles inside 50 a match. That's where we need to be, which means that, your tools have got to pitch in and be tackling as well. So I just can't see, of course, that whole sort of narrative that Demonland, that, his mates with Goodwin and all of that stuff with Melksham's just a total load of nonsense, of course. But, it's just still, nonetheless, it's like I can't see how he keeps his spot, because he's not putting a compelling argument together with setting up goals. He set up those two, but that was it. And when we needed him in the last quarter, he wasn't there to set up a goal. Like if he kicked the clutch goal when we'd won, I'd be saying, well, he's earned his keep. But he didn't, and he didn't pressure. So surely he has to come out, and Captain Jack surely comes in for mine.
Yeah, and the other critical thing, firstly, the fact that the commentators on the television can see exactly what we're seeing, and in a couple of these cases we've been saying for quite some time, you would think that the coaches are well and truly aware of this particular problem. And if there's one team that you must apply forward pressure to, it's the Bulldogs. You cannot let Caleb Daniel waltz around the back line and do exactly what he wants. You need the forwards to be tackling and shutting him down, because if he starts distributing the ball, the game is as good as over. So yeah, I can't see how Melksham can possibly stay in the side this week. I think they've probably got an excuse with what looked like an ankle injury towards the end of the game, but this is the game that we need to make sure that the forward pressure increases dramatically from what it's been.
Andy, there's a couple of questions in the chat room.
I haven't been looking, so yeah, please.
Terence Langley asked, is it his fault? And I presume he means about Frida, and the answer is yes. I think it is his fault, because he was flying before that, 6 goals, and he's fallen off a cliff since then. Fridge say yes, Terence, definitely your fault there. And the old fart thinks that reduced defensive pressure, wonders whether that's attributed to players tiring, and and will we bounce back? My answer to that is yes, is 100%. We're gassed, and I think it is worth remembering how many young players that we've got in this side. We've talked about it a number of times, but Cozzy, Jackson, Rivers, Jordan, they're all second-year players. We're asking them to do a lot, which is a very physical game, and we'll bounce back for sure. It's just that our model, Richmond have shown it. We've got the Richmond template in terms of the level of pressure. It's just simply not possible to maintain this. If you think back to the Hawthorn side, in their period of dominance, they can play a completely different game of football, very much like how West Coast play now, where it's all about ball control. And it's all, I read an article that described it as almost an architectural way of playing. It completely different in terms of the impact on the players. And that's how they could go through seasons sort of with minimal losses and maintain it. Our ballistic style of football is hardcore to maintain. So, their fitness crew will have a lot of work to get them right and get them peaking. So it's built for finals, I think, the Alpha. So Terence Langley makes the point that in that clip just a bit afterwards, Montagna makes the point that don't worry, Demons fans, we're the real deal, and I think he makes a good point.
Do you think, both Andy and Binman, that there's a role for Bedford in the team as well?
Well, if Bedford comes in, you would think one of the other small forwards has to come out. It's not going to be Cozzy. Neil Bullen's been...
it could be Bedford for Melksham and not Sparrow. That would be...
What's his form been like at Casey?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I think Sparrow got another 30 possessions this week.
No, he did, yep.
Yeah.
Well, this week, if the game goes ahead, it's a bit worrying. I have a feeling either we're going to have games without crowds this week, but there's that very big possibility. Depending on what happens in the next few days with COVID cases from this outbreak. There's a very real possibility that there is no football this week. I noticed, B-Man, you said game will go ahead this week.
Yes, and I've proposed that they should only allow people who've had at least one vaccination shot to go. And seeing I have had one, that would qualify me for a ticket. I think that's only fair that we get rewarded the people are doing the right thing by the rest of the community and getting herd immunity up, then we should be rewarded with tickets to this game.
I don't think they're going to do that. As much as you would like that's not going to happen.
Yes, it's going to be interesting, isn't it, Andy? But I think you're right. There's a not unrealistic possibility that a couple of games may be played without crowds. Until the government can actually determine whether the numbers of positives are increasing or decreasing. Once they're decreasing, I think they'll be a little bit more amenable to it. But at the moment, it's really, really up in the air, and I can certainly see it as a realistic possibility. Certainly no crowds because the clubs themselves are probably still maintaining COVID bubbles, although
I don't think they are they?
I think you'll find they are to a certain extent, and the Bulldogs have actually they're all on isolation at the moment.
But only because someone was at High Point or wherever it was.
Yeah, but if they come back with negatives, then they'll be all right to play.
But the other clubs aren't being regularly tested from the last time I heard.
Richmond footy players they think the bubble is a hotel on a Saturday night.
Yeah, they were at a nightclub.
Let's meet down the bubble and get into a blue. It's going to be I'll be really disappointed if Essendon and West Coast game gets impacted by this, which is every chance.
Well, I read just before that providing that Essendon all pass COVID test, they will be allowed to go to West Australia and play.
They'd all be a bit nervous about getting an injection for the vaccine, wouldn't they, at Essendon?
Yes.
I might have to check with their managers to see whether these noodles are okay.
Exactly. You might want to ask some questions.
I think someone on Demonland suggested that they should have given the national vaccination program to the Essendon Football Club because they're so good at it.
Well, I think Shane Carter's in charge of the federal response to the...
Was one of you just suggesting that there might be some Victorian games that go ahead with crowds and then some that don't? Perhaps the Marvel Stadium inside games?
No, surely that won't matter. I mean, geez. they'll either call them off. It won't be anything to do with the Marvel Stadium.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's potential. I think it'll actually the numbers tomorrow. So they'll be pretty keen to go ahead and not to put it in restrictions. But if we wake up tomorrow and there's 10 more, then that's probably all she wrote for footy this weekend in Victoria. And I don't know what that means for the interstate games. But if there's no new cases, I think they'll go ahead with the game with reduced crowds.
Going to cause a lot of headaches in terms of fixturing. We might see a return of the compressed fixture coming back because they're going to have to play this game at some point.
Well, the bye's coming up, so they could bring the bye forward, and maybe we could play them in the week that we had the bye. Viney would be back. And we get a rest into some of our younger players to sort out that issue that you were talking about a moment ago. Yeah.
Is the Viney story something that we should be worried about, or was it originally a 1-2?
Well, it wasn't last week. There was a story early in the week that he was perhaps going to play again this week, and then all of a sudden it's 2 to 3 weeks, or it was 2 weeks, and now it's gone to 2 to 3. There's obviously he's had some, when he's tried to put pressure back on it and go back to full-time training, there's obviously hot spots have popped up. So, yeah, I would say it's a definite worry because he probably has to deload for a few weeks, and then when he goes back and starts reloading, if hotspots come up again, this is the same thing we had back in, was it 2017, 2018?
Yeah, it's although it's apparently in a different area, it is exactly the same problem.
Same problem.
It's related to it, I think he said, because of the different weight bearing on the feet that the other issue causes, and it creates hotspots in his toe or whatever from the different gait that they've got from running. So, bloody hell, it's the last thing he needed. And the other one, Vandenberg's back into selection this week, so he's another player whose career's been, even more than mine, impacted by foot injuries.
The sad part about Viney is he's reached those terrible numbers that we all know at the Melbourne Football Club, about 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Well, he's been 2 to 3 weeks for about 4 to 6 weeks.
That's right. Yeah.
I think he's been the other factor in the last 5-6 weeks in terms of, or the last 4 weeks. He's defensive. Again, that structure. You rob Peter to pay Paul by putting Jordan away from the halfback flank out, that sort of outside player role where he's up around the 80%, 85, 90% disposal efficiency, and basically asking him to do Viney's job as the defensive inside mid. So you lose what you got from him, Jordan, and we haven't got enough players to replace him with, which sort of speaks to where Bowie's at. It was really unfortunate that Bowie was had that injury, which put his sort of program back for a couple of weeks, because he would have thought he was the obvious in for Salem, and surely if he was ready, that's what they would have done. So I'm not sure. I know he played on the weekend, and I think he played reasonably.
Well, he was in a moon boot the week before, and then played the next week. So that's a miraculous recovery.
So he might still be another couple of weeks before they'd consider him. But he's the only sort of elite kick that's coming up through underneath Salem. So that, sacrificing Jordan's role as that sort of outside player to play Viney's role, and missing Viney's strength in the contest, you can't imagine that the game would have been different, wouldn't it? If Viney was in that game on the weekend, he would have smashed in that last quarter, that's that one player can make a big difference in terms of the end result.
Do you think we need to give Jordan a rest? He'll certainly look very tired with some of his kicking on the weekend.
Yeah, I just think it's a long season. That's what I was saying a few weeks. So that's why I was so dirty that we'd lost this game. You get your 10 games and your 10 wins, and then I wouldn't have minded them resting them against the Dogs, because you get your 10 wins. It doesn't really matter if we win or lose this game, because then you're sort of, particularly if you are resting players. So Terence asked in the chat room whether, in terms of injuries, where the update's not been given by Darren Burgess, is that a sort of an issue to think about, or I wondered the same thing, but I think maybe he's back in Adelaide or
No. I saw photos from training the other day, and he was definitely there. 100%, he was definitely there because there was a photo of him at training. So I don't know why he's not giving the reports. They've had about 3 or 4 different people give them in the last few weeks, and I must say there's a discrepancy from week to week, and I know injuries, there's probably no definitive weeks to things, and we've seen over the years, George, definitely, 4 to 6 weeks crop up for long periods of time. But this week, Viney moved from 2 weeks to 2 to 3 weeks. Vandenberg went from 2 weeks last week to available. Bailey Laurie went from 5 weeks to 5 to 6 weeks. Smith went from 4 weeks to 3 to 4. That's not too bad. But Hoare, who last week they said 10 to 12 weeks, meaning you might get a look in later, has gone back to season. So it's sort of all over the shop from week to week. But I don't think there's anything in Darren Burgess not doing the injury reports as long as he's still doing his job.
Just getting us used to the fact that he probably won't be here at the end of the year. So a few more faces that we get to know.
Perhaps. Big Man, do you want to go into any sort of previewing of the of this upcoming game? How we go about stopping the Bulldogs and their midfield?
Yeah, I think this promises to be a fantastic game, and I mean, I love. It's hard not to love the way the Bulldogs play. A few weeks ago, I heard Beveridge being interviewed, and he's a funny bugger. He's super competitive, and I guess all of those, of course, the senior coaches are all super competitive. And he was asked about, I think it was in the lead up to the Dogs Richmond game, and he was asked about pressure, and he made a joke about, well, it wasn't really a joke, he made a comment about back in 2016 that they invented the pressure game. And that Richmond copied them the following year. And it's interesting because if you think back, that's what they were doing, that sort of wave. What they've added to the mix that's different to Melbourne and Richmond is their incredible ability to move the ball through traffic by hand and to go straight through. They go through the corridor, they go through, they work their way directly through a zone, not around it. And they do that by running in numbers. And their ability and their confidence to get it free to the outside player with handball. And there's been a lot of talk recently about how important Liberatore is to that. He's the player who gets it out to that outside ring. And that's an element we've really copied a little bit, is to just get the one player in at the contest and then feed it out to the players on sort of the middle ring and then the outer ring. And no one does that better than the Dogs getting it from inside to outside. They're phenomenal at it. And the critical thing, is key word is pressure. It's interesting the way this game's come on the back of that. It was a tough physical game for us, and we weren't quite up to the level of pressure of the Crows. We will need to be that pressure meter, which they should put more often up and through a game, because it's obviously a critical stat. And it's got 7 elements apparently. The Dogs' pressure meter was up around 300 now. I don't know. It means like a volcano level. I'm not sure what that against the Saints, and they maintained that right through the game. And they just smashed them off the park. It was incredible to watch what they did to the Saints. We need to match it, and the template is the way that Richmond dismantled them in the second half. That game is exactly the model for us. If we put enough pressure on the Liberatores not to get it out to the outside ring, well, we'll be well in that game. Our whole model is built to defeat the way they play, which is why I think it's such a fascinating contest, because, I agree that 100% the benchmark. What I would say is that it's a really long season, and I've always thought that their model's got a tactical flaw in terms of how important it is. It's so based on clearances, so it's strength versus strength. Our strength is our defensive structure and our zone and our ability to absorb pressure in our back half, trap it in our forward half. Their strength is their incredible ability to score from clearances. So it's harder to disrupt ours if we've got full effort and full defensive running. When you don't have that defensive running, you see what happened to us against the Crows. But I think you can disrupt theirs by applying enough pressure. And then the challenge is, well, if you can apply enough pressure, go for it, see whether you can work your way through this. Against Richmond, they couldn't, and they barely scored in the second half of that game against Richmond, and they turned it over probably 15, 20 times in that game, and that's what we'll be looking to do to them. So, I think they go into this game clear favourites, deserved favourites, phenomenal team, phenomenal midfield, but we've got a great midfield as well, and a lot will depend on how Max gels with that midfield and gives us first use of the ball.
Do you think that from my observations in the Richmond game, they played a really physical brand of football against them, certainly from that second quarter onwards, where they just physically smashed the Liberatores and they physically smashed the McRaes and the Hunters, and then they sort of ran out of steam in their ability to distribute the ball. Do we actually have that sort of player?
We've never done it, and we don't have Viney. So.
Yeah.
Well, I reckon we do. I mean, the way Oliver's playing, the way Track is playing, that like we are a physical team. So I think just all over the ground. Like that's where it's an interesting thing in terms of our model, because we were up for the game. Our pressure was okay against the Crows, but you have to say their pressure was a bit better than ours right through the game. Psychologically, even if you were on a subconscious level, knowing that you've got the Dogs the next week and your whole ability to beat them is to play at a certain level of pressure, it would be hard to think to not drop off a little bit the previous week, wouldn't it? Particularly if the messaging is, well, we're trying a few things here, we're putting Weed in, we're not replacing Salem with a like for like. That's a bit of a subtle message that you're playing a bottom team, which is why it worried me, to be honest, and it's why I was worried at half time. But I think they do have that ability to physically target and to get them. And, Harms might have been that player. I guess he's not really that sort of physical player. But I hope that they worry about us. Like, and what do they do about Oliver? What do they do about Petrarca? Cozzy needs to sort of he's been quiet. He needs to have a big game. I think they'll be I really hope there's crowds and because the D's will feed off that energy and they've been looking for this game. So, I reckon we've got the ability to physically go at them. I take your point that maybe not as well as, say, the Tigers, who are pretty well practiced at smashing up other teams and a bit older perhaps. But
you worried about any of their forwards, Norton and Bruce? Bruce has always given us troubles, but our backline's certainly a lot better than it has been in the past when we've come up against him for various different teams.
For me, it just comes back again to pressure. If they're getting clean, if Bontempelli and McRae and those Hunters, they're getting clean ball out of the centre, then they'll cut us up. But if we can stop that, make it a messy entry, then we'll go to work from the back half from them, I reckon.
Yeah, they get their goals from those strong marking leading forwards, and as Binman's right, if they don't get the clean entries coming in there, they'll struggle to actually put a sufficient score on the board because they don't have a great number of other small forwards that are really a threat. But you've just got to stop them running in those waves and giving that clean entry, because they do it not just from the middle of the ground, they do it all from all aspects of the ground as they go into the 50, which means people have got to work. And I hope we've got people, particularly in the forward line, our forward line, who stop those halfback flankers moving freely up the ground.
I reckon that's an absolute key point, George, because there'll be a lot of focus in the lead up about the clearance numbers, and often people sort of just assume clearances, I think, default to centre clearances, but it's around the ground stoppages. And you're spot on. What we need to do is to, the other way that teams like we saw Adelaide get against us, but a team like Dogs, where they get their clean entries is when they transition the ball super quick from the back half, and the defensive unit doesn't have time to get back and clog up their forward line. And so your Nortons and their forwards have got those channels to lead into. We need to, and that they're absolutely lethal at that at Docklands, because of how narrow it is and how quickly they get it up from one end, from their defence to their forward line. that requires super level of work for us just to slow it down enough to allow our defence to set up behind the ball and get ahead of it, for the Langdons and Gus to get in behind there and run back, our mids to push back. You need to have someone like a Hunt and Rivers and those players getting across and manning up the marks, stopping that transition, and the forward line working super hard on trapping it and making, if they do exit, slowing them down on that exit, giving them time to get in position. Otherwise, they have space. And then, you saw what happened against St Kilda. They just were hapless, St Kilda, in terms of they just could not get space or players behind the ball. It was a phenomenal game of footy to watch from an offensive point of view.
The Bulldogs, I'm quite envious of the way they dismantle some teams. Certainly we haven't been able to do it this year. I think they've won by over 100 points twice this year. Pretty impressive. That's something I'd like us to do, but I think Beveridge doesn't get his due because he won that 2016 flag. Like the way, going back to that comment, he bristled a bit, and it was a half joke, half we invented this game. We invented this. We took the mantle from Hawthorn, who had that hold the ball, kick the ball, precision kicking. We changed the way football is played in the 2016, which made it a pressure game. Richmond came along and took it to another level. But what since 2016, as I say, the twist that he's put on it is to continually targeting good kicks. So they've just looked for really elite kicks and brought them into the team. So they've got that combination. And obviously over the last 5-6 years worked super hard on those handball throws that they do. They must train them for hours to do it. And so like they've targeted good kicks now, and a lot of left foot kicks as well, for 5-6 years, and it's now starting to bear fruit. I do like them. Well, before we finish up, I did want to mention they have released our Guernsey for the Sir Doug Nicholls round, and I'm really impressed with it. I love the design this year. I think it looks really nice, and I don't think we're wearing it this week. I think we will be wearing it when we play in Alice Springs against the Lions, but it did really look good. You liked it, George?
I like all of them, Andy. They really look fantastic. It adds just a fantastic cultural aspect to our game. Look forward to it every year. It's just great to see.
Yeah, it's gorgeous, this one. I've been meaning to buy one, and I thought I'd buy one. I read on Demonland there's only small and large left. I was thinking neither of those.
I think it was small and extra large were all that was left, yeah.
Yeah, right, well, extra large ain't going to be large enough.
Need the two or three XLs for you.
Yeah, that's right.
Anything else, boys, before we close down?
Nothing from me, Andy.
Fingers crossed that we get no more cases tomorrow and we get to go to the footy on Friday.
Well, I did read somewhere that there was an unconfirmed report that there's possibly a Bayside case linked directly to the case that was announced, to one of the cases today. So that's not good if it's sort of travelled elsewhere.
Yeah, we don't want it south of the Yarra.
No, just that would knock out some of our finest members, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
All right, well, let's hope we can at least get to the footy this week. If not, at least watch footy, because I don't want to deal with compacted rounds, because that certainly didn't help us last year. I don't even want to think about hubs and grand finals played in different states, because that'll just absolutely kill me.
1 week at a time, one pandemic at a time.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, everyone stay safe out there, and we'll be back next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Legs.